Hi, I'm Ricky Natali. I've been playing around with HDR ever since I bought my Nikon D5100 back last summer. One of the things I've been playing around with is the best way to actually take the exposures. For HDR, you normally want to take a series of bracketed exposures, usually three, sometimes more. And I've been struggling with the best way to set that up for the D5100. The D5100 will take three bracketed exposures. You control how much exposure variation is between each one. Normally what I like to do is take three exposures, one that's 2 stops underexposed, one that's normally exposed, and one that's 2 stops overexposed. So the D5100, you can set that up fairly easily. You just turn on auto bracketing and you say to make a 2-stop or two exposure value difference between the exposures. But what I've been struggling with is how best to actually then take those pictures. At first I had thought that it would just, if you set that up, you hit the button, it would take 3 exposures and stop. It doesn't work that way. Normally what will happen is it'll take 1 exposure at one of the 3 exposures, then wait for you to press the shutter release again. It takes the second and then the third. That's a little inconvenient. The other problem I've had with that is that sometimes I'll forget that I've put the camera into auto bracketing mode, and then I'll be taking normal shots, and I'll be confused because I'm getting very inconsistent exposures until I realize that every third exposure is normal, every third exposure is overexposed, and every third exposure is underexposed. So I've tried with various modes, or trying out various modes to try to get it to just take 3 exposures, take the bracketing sequence and stop. I've tried various things, trying to set the release mode into continuous, using the multiple exposure settings. Nothing seemed to work, or at least work reliably. But recently I was asking about this on a forum that's attached to Trey Ratcliffe's HDR tutorial, and somebody made a comment about, well, you need to set the dial to delayed exposures, which didn't make sense for the D5100 because there is no dial setting for delayed exposure. But I decided to look a little bit more, and I think I figured out how to do it. First, let me demonstrate the way the camera works, or has been working normally for auto bracketing. Okay, so now what I've done is I've got the I'm showing the display of the 5100. I'm in live view, which I don't really need to be here. I was just using this to set up the video. Let me take it out of live view. Here's the regular display, and if I hit the information button again, it puts me into the mode where I can change settings. Now, first of all, you'll notice that I've got the bracketing set for auto exposure, 2 stops between exposures. Let me show you how I've set that up. I've got the function button, if I can find it without looking, set up to be bracketing, and then I can use the thumb wheel to switch how many stops. So, and it's very nice if I turn the thumb wheel one direction, it'll just turn it on, or turn it off rather, and then toggle back to 2, which is what I normally use. Or you can select other bracketing ranges, I guess. Okay, so getting back to this, hit the information button again, and I'm going to scroll up, and you'll see that I've got the release mode set to single shot. So now let me take a series of exposures, and I'll show you how the camera normally works. So I'm going to hit the shutter button once. It takes 1 exposure. I hit it again. It takes another exposure. And I hit it again, and it takes the 3rd exposure. And each one of those would be bracketed. Okay? So you have to remember to take the multiple exposures. You also have to remember to take the camera out of auto bracket mode when you go to taking regular single exposures. So now I'm going to show how I set it up using the combination of delayed shutter release, which seems to do the trick. So here's what I found today, based on the comment that was made on Trey's forum. So now I'm going to change the release mode, and I'm going to change it to 10-second delay. Okay. So now when I take the exposure, I'm giving the 10-second delay. So I get a long 10-second pause and then short pauses between each exposure. So in this mode, you'll notice that it just takes 3 exposures. You have to wait 10 seconds for the first one. You have to wait a second or so between the first and the second, and the second and the third, which is nice. Now, I would prefer it if I could actually do this using the remote shutter release. The camera does have a mode for either an immediate remote shutter release or a 2-second delay release. Unfortunately, neither one of those seems to do this job, but in either of those modes, it seems to just take 1 exposure in the bracket for each activation of the remote shutter release. But I think this technique of using the 10-second delay with the regular shutter release button, I think that's probably going to be the way that I'm going to take most of my HDR exposures from now on. I hope this helps some other 5100 users. Bye.